The station was quiet, the way it always was at the middle of the night cycle. Kestrel Gate turned slowly in the dark, far from any sun, its lights blinking in a calm and steady rhythm. Inside the comms room, Ethan Marsh sat with his boots on the desk and his eyes half closed. He had worked this shift for 11 years. Nothing ever happened at this hour. The coffee was cold, the chair was old, and the only sound was the soft hum of the machines around him. On the screen in front of him, a small green light blinked once every few seconds. That light meant Earth was talking. Every night at the same hour, Earth sent a small burst of data through the deep relay. It was nothing exciting. Prices for grain and metal, weather reports for 3 cities, a note about a customs fee that had changed. The kind of message a board clerk might send to another board clerk on the other side of the galaxy. Ethan had read 1,000 of these messages, and he never read them twice. He watched the numbers roll across the screen without really seeing them. His mind was already back home, thinking about his sister's wedding, which was still 4 months away, and about whether he should ask for leave early or late. He was thinking about all of this, and not about the message from Earth, when the message from Earth simply stopped. It did not fade. It did not break into pieces the way a signal does when it is too weak, or when something is in the way. It stopped the way a voice stops when someone puts a hand over a mouth. One word was cut clean in half, then nothing. Ethan sat up straight. He looked at the light. It was still blinking, but now it blinked with no message behind it, like a heart still beating in a body that had stopped breathing. He tapped the screen twice, thinking it was his own mistake. Nothing changed. He leaned closer and typed a short command, asking the relay to repeat the last packet. The machine answered him with a single word: none. He told himself it was nothing. A solar flare, maybe. A satellite drifting for a second out of position. These things happened once or twice a year, and they always fixed themselves within a minute. He waited. 1 minute passed, and then 5. The light kept blinking, empty and patient, like it was waiting for him to notice something was wrong. Ethan opened the second channel, the one Earth used only for emergencies. He had never used it himself. Nobody on the station had, not once in 11 years. He typed the code with fingers that were suddenly less steady than before and sent a short message: "Relay check, please respond." He watched the screen. No answer came back. He tried a third channel. An old military band that had not been used since before he was born, kept only because someone somewhere had decided it should never be shut down completely. He sent the same short message. Again, nothing. By now his heart was beating fast, and the cold coffee sat forgotten by his elbow. He pulled up every channel the station had ever used to speak with Earth, one after another, and sent the same short question down each one. "Relay check, please respond." The answers came back the same way every time. Silence. Not an error message. Not a busy signal. Not even the small automatic reply that machines usually send when nobody is home. Just silence, the kind that happens when there is truly nobody listening at all. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He walked to the door, then walked back to the desk, then walked to the door again. He told himself to think clearly. A relay this old had systems built to survive almost anything: solar storms, equipment failures, even small wars. For every single channel to go dark at once, with no warning and no error, something very big had to have happened, or something very big had to have been done on purpose. Neither answer made him feel better. He called the captain. Daniel Ose answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Ethan didn't waste time with a greeting. He said only that Earth had gone silent on every channel all at once, with no warning. There was a pause on the other end long enough that Ethan wondered if the call had dropped too. Then Daniel said he would be there in 5 minutes, and told Ethan to wake Priya Nalan and have her run a full check on the station's own equipment first, because before they believed the worst, they had to be completely sure the problem wasn't sitting right there in their own hardware. Priya arrived in her sleep clothes, hair tied back in a hurry, already asking questions before she reached the door. She sat down at a second console and began running every test she knew, checking the antenna alignment, the power levels, the internal wiring, everything a relay station could possibly get wrong on its own. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, still buttoning his jacket, and stood behind them both without saying much, watching the numbers scroll by. An hour passed, then two. Priya's tests came back clean, one after another. The station's equipment was working exactly as it should. The problem, whatever it was not on their end. That should have felt like good news. Instead, the room grew quieter because it meant the problem was somewhere between Kestrel Gate and Earth itself, and there was no comfortable explanation left standing. By the time 3 hours had passed with total silence from an entire homeworld, no ships reporting in, no drones, no automatic beacons, no distant chatter of any kind, Daniel sent a short and careful message to the nearest galactic waypoint, simply stating that contact with Earth had been lost and asking if anyone else had heard anything at all. The answer, when it came back hours later, was worse than no answer. Nobody had heard anything either. Not one ship, not one station, not one voice. Ethan sat back down at his desk as the first light of the station's morning cycle began to brighten the room. He looked at the little green indicator that still blinked, calm and steady, exactly as it always had, showing a connection that technically still existed and carried nothing at all. In 11 years, that light had never once gone dark, and it was not dark now either. It simply had nothing left to say. And somewhere far beyond the edge of human space, word of that silence was already beginning to travel outward, from ship to ship and world to world, carrying with it a fear that every listening species in the galaxy already understood far too well. Word travels fast in the dark between stars, faster than any ship can fly. Within a day of the silence from Earth, the news had already reached the nearest waypoint, and from there it spread outward like water, finding every low place it could reach. By the third day, 5 different trade envoys had quietly packed their bags and left human space without waiting for anyone to tell them to go. By the end of the week, the story had reached the Galactic Assembly itself, and an emergency session was called before the sun had even risen over the Assembly's home world. The room where the session took place was round, with seats rising in circles around a central floor. Counselor Iram Vex stood in that middle now, an old woman by the standards of her own people, with eyes that had seen this exact meeting far too many times before. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Everyone in the room already knew why they had gathered, and everyone already feared they knew how it would end. She began by saying the same words she always said at meetings like this. She reminded the Assembly that in the 400 years since the Commons had been formed, 11 member species had gone silent the way Earth had just gone silent. 11 times, a homeworld had simply stopped speaking mid-sentence without warning, without a distress call, without a single explanation. And 11 times, when ships were finally sent to look, they had found nothing left to save. Sometimes it was a weapon nobody had seen coming. Sometimes it was a plague that moved faster than anyone could react to. Once, it had simply been a star that turned unstable years ahead of every prediction. The causes were different every time. The pattern was always the same. Silence meant the end. A young delegate from a species that had only joined the Commons a decade earlier asked, in a voice that clearly hoped for a different answer, whether it might simply be a technical failure this time, a broken relay, a storm in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Iram Vex did not answer him unkindly, but she did not soften the truth either. She said that in 400 years, this exact excuse had been offered exactly 11 times before, and every single time it had turned out to be wrong. She did not enjoy being right about this. She wished, more than anyone in the room understood, that she could be wrong just once. The Assembly voted, and the vote was not close. All ships were ordered to keep clear of human space until further notice. The official reason given was containment, in case whatever had struck Earth could somehow spread. The unofficial reason, understood by everyone but spoken by no one, was that nobody wanted their own ship to be the one that found the wreckage first. A small committee was quietly formed to begin drafting the memorial resolution, the same kind of document that had been written 11 times before, listing the species' name, its history, and the sorrow of the assembly at its passing. It was, by long habit now, simply what was done. Vesek Thal received his orders the same afternoon. He was a Zeltarin diplomat, calm by nature and careful by training, the kind of man who read every sentence of a contract twice before signing it. His government did not ask him to help humanity, only to travel to the edge of human space, watch from a safe distance, and confirm what the assembly already believed to be true. He did not think this assignment would take long. He packed for a short trip. Back on Kestrel Gate, the mood was very different from the calm and formal air of the assembly's chamber. Priya Nalan had not slept properly in 3 days. She sat in the records room surrounded by screens, going through every transmission Earth had sent in the last 11 years, looking for anything, any small detail, that the rest of the galaxy might have missed in its rush to write humanity's funeral. Most delegates assumed that grief made people careless, but Priya had noticed something that felt less like grief and more like a puzzle, with a piece hidden in plain sight. 8 months earlier, buried inside a routine diplomatic cable about trade regulations, Earth had mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that it had recently completed a full-scale test of something called a continuity protocol. The cable gave no further details. No other message, before or since, ever explained what that protocol actually was. Priya had read that single sentence a dozen times, turning it over in her mind, and the more she read it, the less it sounded like the kind of thing a dying planet would mention in passing. It sounded like the kind of thing a careful planet would test in advance, in case it ever needed to disappear on purpose. She brought the cable to Captain Daniel Ose late at night, her eyes red from staring at screens for too long. She explained her theory carefully, aware of how strange it might sound out loud. What if Earth had not been destroyed at all? What if Earth had gone dark deliberately, the way a soldier might go still and quiet rather than run, hoping that whatever hunted by sound would pass by without noticing? Daniel listened without interrupting, his arms crossed, his face unreadable in the low light of the room. When she finished, he did not laugh at her, and he did not agree with her either. He only said that it was a good theory, and that good theories needed proof, not hope, before anyone repeated them out loud, especially with the whole galaxy already writing eulogies. Still, he did not dismiss it. He asked her to keep digging quietly and to bring him anything else she found. It was, he admitted, the first idea anyone had offered him in days that did not end with the words "Earth is gone." Far across the dark distance between stars, Vesek Thal's ship finally slowed as it approached the outer edge of the human system, its sensors sweeping ahead of it the way a careful man tests the ice on a frozen lake before stepping onto it. He expected wreckage. He expected drifting debris, or the cold silence of a world with nothing left alive on it, the kind of silence he had read about in 11 old reports. Instead, his instruments showed him something that made him sit forward in his chair and check the readings twice, certain at first that something on his own ship had gone wrong. Every human installation in the system, every station, every satellite, every outpost, was still exactly where it should be. Nothing was broken. Nothing was scattered. Nothing showed the marks of any weapon or disaster at all. It was simply dark. Every single light, every single signal switched off at once, like a house where someone inside had calmly walked from room to room turning out every lamp before going to bed, rather than a house that had burned to the ground. Vesek Thal stared at the readings for a long time before he finally spoke into his own recorder, and the words he chose, though he did not know it yet, would echo through every briefing room in the Commons within days. This does not look like a death. This looks like someone closing their eyes on purpose. 4 days before the silence and half a galaxy away from the fear it would cause, General Laura Kimura stood in a command room deep under a mountain, watching a wall of screens with her arms folded and her face calm. She had been planning this day for 3 years. Everyone in the room with her had trained for it for almost as long. To them, it was not a disaster. It was a drill, the biggest one Earth had ever run. The room was called the deep floor, built far below the surface, thick walls all around it, and no windows anywhere. Laura Kimura liked it that way. She had spent her whole career studying what happened to other species once the rest of the galaxy learned exactly where they lived and exactly how they talked to each other. She had read the reports on all 11 of the species that had vanished before Earth ever joined the wider commons, and unlike most people who read those reports, she had not simply felt sadness. She had felt something closer to anger, and out of that anger years ago, she had begun building a plan. The plan was simple to describe and hard to build. If an enemy could always find you by listening to your own signals, then the answer was to stop signaling completely. All at once, everywhere, the instant real danger appeared. Every satellite would go dark. Every relay would go dark. Every ship in the system would cut its transmissions at the exact same moment. Earth would vanish from the sky the way a candle vanishes when someone pinches the flame, not blown out by an enemy, but put out on purpose by its own hand before any enemy ever got close enough to matter. She called it the continuity protocol, and today, for the first time, they were testing it at full scale, on every system Earth had, not in a lab, not in pieces, but everywhere at once. Her second-in-command, a quiet man named Carlos Ibarra, stood beside her with a tablet in his hands, watching the countdown tick toward 0. He asked if she was sure about running the test on every channel at once, including the ones that spoke to the rest of the galaxy. Laura Kimura did not look away from the screens when she answered. She said a drill only meant something if it tested the whole system, not a comfortable piece of it. She wanted the truth, even if the truth was inconvenient for a few hours. The countdown reached 0, and across an entire planet, lights went out that had never gone out before. Satellites shut their transmitters. Relay stations sealed their outward channels. Every ship in Earth's home fleet switched from open broadcast to a private, hidden network built only for this moment. A set of signals so short and so well hidden that nothing outside the system could hope to catch them. The change happened everywhere at the same second, the result of 3 years of planning and 100 smaller tests before this one. From the outside, to anyone watching, it would have looked like a whole world had simply stopped existing. Inside the deep floor, the mood was almost cheerful. Screens that once showed outward signals now showed only internal traffic, calm and orderly, ships checking in with each other over the hidden network exactly as planned. Laura Kimura allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first one Carlos had seen from her in weeks. The drill was meant to run for exactly 6 hours, long enough to prove the system could hold under real conditions, and then everything would switch back on, quietly, without any of the rest of the galaxy ever noticing that anything had happened at all. Nobody outside Earth's own command structure even knew the drill was taking place. That was part of the plan, too. A secret only stays a secret if almost nobody is told. 3 hours in, everything was still going well. Then, in a section of the deep floor far from the main room, a technician named Ben Akafer noticed a strange reading on one of the systems meant to bring the outward relays back online at the end of the drill. It was a small thing at first, a single component reporting a fault that should not have been possible, buried inside the reactivation sequence that would, in a few hours, switch every dark signal back on at once. Ben ran the check twice, then a third time, and each time the fault reported back the same way. He brought it to his supervisor, who brought it to Carlos, who brought it, finally, to Laura Kimura herself. The problem, once they understood it, was almost embarrassing in how small it seemed. A single piece of software, meant to confirm that every system was ready before switching signals back on, had a flaw that only appeared under the exact conditions of a full, planet-wide blackout, conditions nobody had ever fully tested before today, because nobody had ever run the drill at this scale before today. The flaw did not put anyone in danger. It did not damage any ship or station. It simply refused to give the final signal that would bring the outward relays back to life, over and over, safely rejecting the reactivation each time like a lock that would not turn no matter how carefully the key was cut. Fixing it meant rebuilding a small piece of the sequence from the ground up, testing it carefully and running it again, and doing all of this without breaking the very blackout they were trying to end. Laura Kimura gave the order calmly, the same way she gave every order, though Carlos noticed her jaw was tighter than before. She told her team to work the problem properly, without rushing, because a mistake made in a hurry now could turn a 6-hour drill into something far worse than 6 hours. What she did not know, what nobody in the deep floor knew, was that far above them, at that very moment, a communications officer on a distant station called Kestrel Gate was already staring at a dead signal light and beginning to feel afraid. The fix that should have taken an hour took a day. The day became 2. Carlos slept in the deep floor rather than go home, and so did most of the team, working in shifts, testing each small change 3 times before trusting it. Laura Kimura stayed the whole time, catching sleep in short pieces on a cot in the corner of the room, waking each time someone's voice changed pitch, the way a parent wakes at the smallest change in a child's breathing. She did not know that outside, the world had already begun to believe Earth was dead. She did not know that ships were being recalled, that borders were being sealed, that an old woman on a council far away was already preparing to add humanity's name to a list of the lost. Inside the deep floor, there was no news from outside, because there could not be, not with every outward channel still sealed shut by the very system they were struggling to repair. All she knew was that the fix was close and getting closer, and that 4 days after the drill began, her team finally found the last small change the sequence needed, tested it once, then twice, then a 3rd time just to be certain, and prepared at last to bring the lights back on. The signal came back the exact same way it had disappeared. No warning, no countdown, no dramatic return. One moment Ethan Marsh was staring at a small green light that had blinked empty and alone for 4 long days. The next moment the light blinked, and a new packet of data poured in behind it, calm and ordinary, prices for grain and metal, a weather report for 3 cities, picking up almost in the middle of a sentence, as if no time at all had passed. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment before he trusted his own eyes. He had spent 4 days checking that light every hour, sometimes every few minutes, until Captain Daniel Osai had gently told him to sleep, and he had refused, and Daniel had stopped arguing about it. Now at last the light was not empty anymore. It was Earth, talking again, in the same bored, ordinary voice it always used, as if it had never stopped at all. He nearly fell out of his chair reaching for the comm switch. His voice cracked when he called for Daniel, and it cracked again when he called for Priya Nalan, who arrived at a dead run, her hair still messy from sleep, convinced for one terrible second that something worse had happened. Instead she saw the screen, saw the data rolling in, and she made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, both at the same time, and had to sit down before her legs gave out under her. Daniel Osa arrived a minute later, still pulling on his jacket, and read the screen twice before he let himself believe it. Then he opened a direct channel, the same emergency band nobody had used in 11 years, and sent a short message asking simply for confirmation that this was truly Earth, and truly safe. The answer came back within a minute, and it came, of all people, from General Laura Kimura herself, her voice tired but steady, apologizing for what she called an unexpected delay in a scheduled systems test, and asking almost politely whether anyone out this way had been worried. Daniel Osai laughed out loud at that, a short, disbelieving laugh, because worry did not begin to cover what the last 4 days had been like. He told her, as calmly as he could manage, that half the galaxy currently believed Earth had been wiped out, that trade routes had been sealed, that a memorial resolution was likely already being drafted somewhere. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Kimura spoke again, her voice had lost some of its calm. She said that had never been part of the plan, and that someone was going to have a great many questions to answer once she got off this call. Word did not travel outward quite as fast as it had gone silent, but it came close. Within hours, Kestrel Gate's own confirmation reached the nearest waypoint, and from there it spread the same way the fear had spread days earlier, ship to ship, station to station, racing across the same distances that had once carried nothing but grief. The reaction split almost instantly into two very different kinds of relief, and one kind of quiet dread that took a little longer to arrive. Ordinary traders and travelers, the people who had simply liked doing business with Earth, or liked human food or human music, or the strange human habit of arguing loudly, and then laughing about it 5 minutes later, were simply glad. Ships that had turned back at the border quietly turned around again. A small crowd gathered at the nearest waypoint's public screen just to watch the confirmation message play over and over, as if repetition might make it more real. For them, it was simple. Their friends were not dead after all. That was enough. For military analysts and careful old diplomats, the relief came with a second thought close behind it, and the second thought was harder to sit with. An entire homeworld, with every ship and station attached to it, had gone completely and perfectly silent on purpose, at a scale nobody in 400 years of the Commons had ever managed or even attempted. No other species had a plan like that. No other species had trained for a blackout the size of a planet and treated it as routine. Earth had not merely survived. Earth had rehearsed disappearing, calmly, as a drill, the same way other species rehearsed evacuation or defense. That was a very different kind of fact to carry home. Far out at the edge of the human system, Vesek Thal watched the change happen from the deck of his own ship, and he watched it the way a man watches something he does not fully believe even while it is happening in front of him. One moment the system had been dark, every station cold and silent exactly as it had been for days. Then within the space of perhaps an hour, light returned across the whole system at once, station after station coming back online in a smooth, ordered wave, no panic, no confusion, no scattered signals arriving out of sequence the way a system in real crisis might behave. It looked, he thought, less like a rescue and more like someone simply flipping a switch back to its original position. He sat with that thought for a long while before he recorded his report. He chose his words carefully, the way he always did, because he knew his government would read this report many times over the coming weeks. He wrote that humanity had just demonstrated something no species in the Commons had ever demonstrated before, the ability to make an entire homeworld disappear from every sensor and every channel at once, and the ability to bring it back just as completely, with no visible damage and, apparently, very little difficulty. He wrote that this should not be read as weakness recovering. It should be read as strength that had simply chosen, for 4 days, not to be seen. Far away, in the round chamber of the Galactic Assembly, Councillor Iram Vex received the news in the middle of reviewing the draft memorial resolution for Earth, the 12th such document she had ever helped prepare. She read the confirmation message twice, slowly, the way she read anything that surprised her, which was not often anymore after 400 years of watching the same pattern repeat itself. She set the draft resolution aside without finishing it, and for a long moment she simply sat in the quiet of her own office, turning the news over in her mind. In 11 previous cases, across 4 centuries, silence from a homeworld had always meant exactly one thing, and the pattern had never once been wrong. This was the first time in her long life that it had been wrong, and she found herself struggling to decide whether the correct feeling was relief or something closer to unease. A species capable of going that silent, that completely, and coming back exactly on its own schedule, was not a fragile thing to be mourned. It was something else entirely, something the Assembly's old rules had never been written to describe, and she suspected, sitting alone in her office with the unfinished resolution in front of her, that those rules were about to need a great deal of rewriting. 3 months later, the round chamber of the Galactic Assembly filled again, But this time the mood in the room was very different from the last time it had met about Earth. There was no talk of memorials. There was no careful, sorrowful language being prepared for a species that no longer needed it. Instead, the delegates had gathered to do something the Assembly had never done in 400 years: rewrite the rule that silence always meant death. Councillor Iram Vex stood in the middle of the round floor again, older, it seemed to some of the delegates, than she had looked 3 months before, though nobody said so out loud. She had spent 4 centuries watching the same pattern repeat itself 11 times, and she had built her entire career, without ever meaning to, around the sad certainty of that pattern. Now she stood in front of the same chamber and admitted plainly that the pattern was no longer certain at all. A species had gone completely silent, every channel, every ship, every station all at once, and had come back exactly on its own schedule, undamaged, almost embarrassed by the fuss it had caused. The old rule could not survive that. She asked the Assembly to help her write a new one. It took most of the day, and most delegates in the room agreed on very little except that something needed to change. Some wanted stricter rules, faster confirmations before anyone was allowed to declare a species lost. Others wanted the opposite, fewer assumptions altogether, so that grief and fear stopped writing conclusions that facts had not earned yet. By the end of the session, no single new rule had been agreed upon, but everyone in the room understood that the simple old idea, silence equals extinction, was gone for good, and Earth was the reason it was gone. Vesek Thal sat near the back of the chamber that day, listening more than speaking, the way he usually did. His own government had already read his report from the edge of human space many times over, and had asked him more than once to explain in person what he had seen. He had done his best, but words never quite carried the strangeness of watching an entire planet's lights switch back on in a smooth, ordered wave, the way you might watch someone finish a task they had planned carefully in advance. His government's final judgment on the matter, delivered a few weeks after his report, described humanity using a word that did not translate perfectly into any human language, but the closest meaning was something like watchful respect, the kind a careful animal shows toward another animal it has just learned can bite far harder than its size suggests. Earth's own response to the whole affair surprised almost everyone who expected drama. There were no grand speeches, no proud announcements about the strength of the continuity protocol, no attempt to use the moment for advantage. Instead, Earth's Foreign Office issued a short, almost boring public statement, apologizing for what it called a miscommunication during a scheduled internal systems test, and expressing regret for any concern the silence may have caused among Earth's trading partners. It read, to anyone outside Earth who studied it closely, like the kind of letter a person sends after arriving 20 minutes late to a dinner, not the kind of letter a species sends after being mistaken for extinct by half a galaxy. Privately, within Earth's own command structure, the protocol was quietly kept in the playbook exactly as it was, tested once more a year later under slightly different conditions, and never spoken of publicly again. Back on Kestrel Gate, life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, though nothing about it felt quite as ordinary as it once had. Ethan Marsh received a formal commendation for his handling of the crisis, a small ceremony, a short speech from Captain Daniel Osai that made Ethan's ears turn red with embarrassment, and a story he knew he would tell for the rest of his life, probably starting with the words "You will not believe the 4 days I once had." He found, to his own surprise, that he no longer dreaded the quiet night shifts the way some of the newer officers did. He had already lived through the strangest night the station would likely ever see, and everything since then felt gentle by comparison. Priya Nalan's stubborn digging through old transmission logs did not go unnoticed either. Within a month, she received a message from Earth's own Defense Research Division, inviting her to join a small team studying exactly the kind of pattern she had noticed almost by accident, the quiet space between what a species chooses to say and what it chooses to leave out. She left Kestrel Gate with mixed feelings, grateful for everything the station had taught her, but eager for the chance to keep pulling at threads other people missed. Daniel Oss signed her transfer papers personally and told her, without much sentiment but with clear sincerity, that the station would be a little less sharp without her around. Daniel himself stayed at Kestrel Gate, watching new trade ships slowly return to the station over the following weeks, cautious at first, then steadily more confident as word spread that Earth truly was fine. He noticed something new in the way visiting captains and diplomats spoke about humanity now, a kind of care in their questions that had not been there before, less like talking to an old trading partner, and more like talking to a neighbor who had just shown, calmly and without any anger at all, exactly how far they were willing to go to protect themselves. He did not think humanity had done anything wrong. He simply understood that the galaxy would remember this for a long time, the way you remember the one time a quiet dog showed you, without ever raising its voice, exactly how hard it could bite if it ever needed to. Months after the crisis had faded from most conversations, a single new line was added to the Galactic Assembly's official first contact briefing packet, tucked quietly beneath the long entry describing humanity's history, culture, and trade habits. It was short, plain, and easy to miss if you were not looking for it, but everyone who worked in diplomacy eventually read it, and nobody who read it forgot it. It stated, without any drama at all, that the species was capable of complete and deliberate silence across its entire home system at will, that the reason for this capability remained officially unknown, and that observers should never, under any circumstances, mistake that silence for weakness. Counselor Irem Vex was the one who approved the final wording, and though she never said so publicly, she privately believed it was the most important sentence she had added to any document in her 400 years of service. A small warning tucked into a small paragraph, meant to make sure that no one, ever again, mistook a quiet planet for a dead one.